Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Let's bring this down just a little bit. You want to see the top of the shelf real quick? Right. Bring this headroom down a little bit. There we go. Well, there's the awesome light that I want you guys to see, but I'm gonna have to get a dimmer. Anybody have a dangling wire for a light bulb that has a dimmer on it? Would you like to donate that to Revolution? I'll give you my address. Because this is a really cool light. I'll put a picture up of it on Instagram and you'll see it. It's really cool. Or I'll put it on the Facebook as well too. Well, welcome everybody. August 16th, my son is turning 11 on 26th. On the 25th, on August 25th, he's going to turn 11. 11 was a big year for me. That was the year that my folks went through their big scandal and my life took a huge change. My birthday's on December 18th, so it's literally like the last 2 weeks of the year. So that would be 1986. So good to see you guys. Welcome. I got my new cool shirt my girlfriend got for me. Look at that. Yeah, it's baggy. It's because it's what the kids are into, man. I'm hip. I'm hip with the kids. Bada bada bang, boom, cool. Beard's gone gray, and you don't have to tell me who I look like. I know. Well, today I am going to touch a little bit about what it was like to go through a journey and go through my own journey as a young child, and kind of what the early part of what wound up here. I often reference back to those days, but I don't spend much in-depth time there. I'll give you little stories here and there for points, but I'm 50 years old, folks. I'm busy. There's a new Social Distortion album out. I have become a gearhead with my 2013 Volkswagen, and and now I do all sorts of maintenance work for an apartment complex, and I work in lawns and have a green thumb. And wow, it used to be like comic book shops, toy shops, and record stores, and now it's like Harbor Freight, and then going to the other hardware stores and rolling my eyes when the prices aren't as affordable. Who would have thunk? But still, Social Distortion is here. Not right here, I wish. Here they are, everybody, Social D. My buddy Brent, who used to work with Revolution for years, is on tour with Social Distortion right now. So if you see Social Distortion coming to your town with the Descendants and the Chats, go to the booth, buy something there, and say hello to Brent and be like, didn't you used to work for Revolution? He also has a really cool candle company, but he keeps changing the name, so I keep forgetting. I've got one of them over here somewhere. Yeah, here's one. It's it was Kaysen's Candles. I think he's changed the name, but they're really good. I'm trying to convince him to do one of Nordstrom's. When you walk into Nordstrom's and there's just the smell of commerce in the morning, the mall. But he's not a big mall fan like me. Maybe he'll do one of, like, since he's hung out with Social D now. But can you do one that's just called Mike Ness? It smells like Mike Ness, so us weird fans can be happy, or just scent of Social Distortion. Anyhow, I digress. I'm just trying to stretch a little bit. Hopefully we have some new folks here. You guys know I've been working so much lately, and it's been great. The guy I work for, has always been kind of, a helicopter boss, making sure I get things done right. But lately he's really been giving me a lot of put a lot of trust in me and let me do a lot of things, and it's been exciting. But it's also, man, because there's different properties, you never know what the day is going to have, and what's going to happen next. And we've been doing a lot of A lot of stuff. Very, very, I'm having to wear a funny hat now because I kept getting, excuse me, have to wear a funny hat now because I kept getting sunburn. I don't even think the funny hat and I'm going to have to get like 100 sunscreen because I burn up like that. And I got to keep the tattoos looking good, So anyhow, don't forget to like and subscribe. Glad you guys are here. Welcome. Good morning. Good morning. Good afternoon. Feel free to say hello in the chats if you'd like. Let me know what's up. Oh yeah, we shut down the GoFundMe today. I shut that down this morning. We did okay. I appreciate everybody's support, but we got about halfway there, and that was great. And that thing sends you texts like, you need to go send it with your friends, share it with your family. I'm like what, 2 people? But my dad's not gonna. My family's broke. Share it with your friends. I'm like, my friends are not gonna donate to Revolution. That's not happening. Half of them are doing the same kind of work. Or just broke. But so I just was like, you know what, we're just going to do it the old-fashioned way and ask folks, hey, if you liked our work, you like what Revolution doing, please help. We could really use your support this month. Me particularly, just because I would like to be able to get fully paid. My after-school job starts in September, which I'm excited about. But my son's birthday's this month, so birthday presents, birthday parties, all that stuff. When I get full pay, it makes that a little bit easier to balance with groceries and rent and all that stuff, not to mention all the Revolution stuff that we have to do. But we did take care of that first with the GoFundMe stuff. It took a month for it to go through, which was crazy. I did sign up for a class, biblical scholarship class on the Apostle Paul that I'm taking right now. I took the first class last night, and it was pretty cool because, like, for most of it, I was like, I know that. Tell me something I don't know. What am I? You should be paying me. But it also felt good to know some of that stuff. But we're going to dive into some things that I'm sure I don't know. There's 3 more classes to go, and then there's all this, tests and study stuff you have to take. But so thanks for supporting Revolution and the further education of myself, so I can continue to bring you, the best of scholarship, but also theology and thoughts and feelings and life and life experience, because that's the important work, because we have got to do things. We've got to make a change. We are got to be people of change. We've got to be people of agape, of grace, and doing that and knowing how, when we do have when we do have tough conversations, it's always great to know what you're talking about. It's very helpful. And I find it, in these days when things are a little bit tense, I find it pretty good to try to be as honest as possible, but also use agape with that, or have people. The one thing I always liked about working in teams with people is that, you had people who had different gifts of like communicating with others and doing things like that. And it was great. I recently had, really strange disagreement with a very angry young person. I think they're young. I don't know. And Zoe, they got in on the conversation, and Zoe just brings such a different balance and such a different level of interaction with people, and that's why I see, if you listen to Revolution, you are part of Revolution. I see that because we all have these different areas of life where we're able to communicate in different ways and do things and defend one another, or even say to one another, hey, I think you went a little hard here, or hey, maybe you should have thought that way, or go like, hey, you're doing a great job. And I feel like, I've never done this before because you're doing such a good job. And I learned, learn from it. That's the great thing, is learn from it and learn to have empathy and sympathy as well with it. So today I renamed the talk a bunch of times, and then I went to upload this to put the talk up on to go live, and it said, I'd written this whole thing out, written an explanation. I was like, oh, this is going to be good. And it was like, error, try again. So I was like, please have saved. And I try again, and it didn't save. So you just got whatever I decided to call this talk that last second, just so we could be on time today. My kids were in Switzerland for 2 weeks visiting their grandparents with their mother, and they just got back, and it's so happy to get back. But I have a very sick little girl. Her tummy's not doing well, and she was very sick last night. And so, life persists and goes, but I'm learning through people and through my girlfriend, and there are other folks to find gratitude in the midst of life, living life on life's terms, which, I learned a lot about in the 12-step program. I'm going to put a little, can I do this? Can I put a smile and then a heart? And then can I, you can put little pictures. Can I put a picture here? Ooh, look at all these fun pictures. Let's find a really fun one here. This guy's going like, is anybody going to say hello? Look at all these fun little, sorry, online listeners. We're just having fun with technology, with 1990s or early 2000s technology. Look, please heal my heart. All right, there you go. All right, there we go. We got Marie. Is that Marie? Marie. I need new glasses too. That's another reason why I'm raising funds, is so when I get paid, I'll go to the eyeglass store. I have insurance, and still, like, they figured out, like, oh, you have insurance? Well, we still figured out a way to we're just going to up the rate. I remember back in the day when you had an eye insurance, you'd go in and you got glasses and you give them like $20, and it was like, oh, sweet. Now it's like, yeah, that'll be $400. Like, what? And like, well, you didn't want lines in the thing, you didn't want, we got you the reflecting coat, like, can I take the reflecting coat off? Too late. All right. ADHD rabbit holes. There they are. So I'll give you a couple different titles for what today was called, and you'll find out once this is officially released. But the first one was ADHD and Healing from the Past. Patience required. I should have named 80s movies. Then there was ADHD and Healing and Tearing Down the New Law. And I think we just decided to go with something like Healing and Tearing Down the New Law, or just Tearing Down the New Law. And that'll all make sense once we get to the end of this talk. I've already gone 20 minutes. Just one of the things I found out about ADHD is you get time blindness. And that makes a lot of sense in my life. So I grew up from ages 0 to 11 in a fishbowl. When my mother was having me as a child, she went to the hospital, and my dad was doing a show, and he's like, I'm going to go with you. And they're like, oh no, she'll be in labor for hours. And they had to do an emergency C-section. So when I was born, it literally flashed, it's a boy, it's a boy. And my dad was like, oh my gosh, I have, he didn't even realize it until he looked down at the monitor and saw it's Jamie Charles Baker was just born. So luckily they had my name figured out at that point. So my early years as a young lad, up until my son's age, strangely enough. And I'm so glad that my son doesn't have to grow up in things like that. I'm so glad that my kids are able to have a normal life. And I'm so grateful to be a great dad. Honestly, that's one thing I can toot my own horn on. But growing up kind of in a fishbowl, it was really, in a way, it was like reality TV before it was a thing, because, you see how transparent I am. I did get a lot of that from my parents. I mean, first of all, their set looked like a house. Hey, everybody, welcome to our home, But then, like, for Christmas things, that actually just bring TV people and like bring the cameras and stuff and do things from our actual house. So it was really, really very strange to grow up. And I was a chubby little kid, so my cheeks got pinched all the time. Oh yeah, and it was kind of a theme park too. Not a ton of rides. I mean, there's a little slow train that went around, but there was a water park at like the last year, there. So that, I guess that would count. But a lot of hotels and parks and camping places and tennis courts. And it was a really, really wild place to grow up. And I had bodyguards, and, I always knew we had bodyguards just to keep us somewhat safe. But later I would read one of my mom's books called Run to the Roar. And I realized, like, all these little trips that we would take were often because there was like threats and bomb threats and like people saying, I'm coming and I'm going to kill Jim Baker. I was like, oh, that's why we went to Florida that one time. I thought we were just having fun, but no, they were going to blow up our house. Weird stuff. And so that was what it was like growing up as a kid and under the spotlight. And like, anytime my friends did anything bad, I got a call being like, we heard you were there. I was like, those are my friends, but I wasn't there. I didn't drop water balloons on anybody. I was too busy playing Miami Vice and putting fake bags of cocaine and playing guns. I was a weird kid. Anyhow, a lot of my early theology, believe it or not, was not from my parents. It wasn't really from, I mean, I had parents who were two of the most famous evangelists in the world. They were even, youth ministers at one time and puppeteers, but most of my theology came from people who worked for my parents, like youth pastors and, my security guards and then you'd see people come in. I'd hear things. You'd listen. I was always listening to see what people were saying and what people were doing. And we had these neighbors, and they weren't really Christians. They'd come to the church sometimes, but and so I had that part of life. I really saw a world. And one of the things that was really interesting, though, for me, is also the contradiction. I've talked a lot about contradiction in the past, and the contradiction of the philosophical concepts of contradictions and what that looks like and how people really struggle with that. It's like when people tell the story of my family or what happened in those days, they really struggle with giving the clearest story. They always kind of focus on negative things or this because they can't embrace the contradiction. It's very hard for people to see contradictions and understand them, especially when they're just contradictions that are just natural events in life, ones that you don't really change. It's not really being it's not really being hypocritical. It's just how things work in life sometimes. And this was the interesting part of growing up in that. A lot of the folks who worked for my parents were part of the Assemblies of God denomination. And it was, they were just like, if you sneeze wrong, you lose your salvation, typical like mega church, if come down to the front, play the music, it's so funny because my parents grew up and part of my dad's family were Assemblies of God and the other part were Lutherans. I'm like, Dad, why didn't you go with the Lutherans? That would have been a whole different ball game, right? But there was this contradiction that kind of existed within that world that I was growing up in. And this is what was really interesting. And I think most people miss out on is, and don't talk too much about is, sorry. Everyone, please turn your phone to silence. Be respectful of your neighbors. Is that you had this place that was a religious place. It was churches, all sorts of stuff going on all the time there. Hundreds of different types of ministries helped people and tried to reconcile all sorts of stuff there. But it was, this kind of evangelical church, but it was a center where people came. There were shopping centers and places to shop and places to eat and restaurants and all this stuff there. So it was something that no one had ever really done before, and it was really working up until the scandal up in 87. But the contradiction that I saw now looking back on that, because I see such a different world today and I've seen such a different world since then, was the equality and the diversity of the human condition that seemed to exist within my parents' work. It was, they were doing, my dad went to Japan and helped start a Christian network out in Japan with, doing things like that. The diversity of, just black and white and Hispanic, it was kind of a rainbow of people that were a part of Heritage USA, and knowing that now that I look back and even I have contact with some people who were there, probably had some reservations. I don't think my parents didn't, because my parents were always, very big supporters of the civil rights movement and bringing people together, even despite political differences or belief differences and things like that. Back then they were. My dad's a little bit more conservative now, but back then they were just really, it was all about bringing people, any person, anyone who had breath and was a human being. They had a home for handicapped people. It was just like, it was, or handicapable people. It was a diverse place. And so I grew up in that. And leaving that was a kind of a shock when you would go into other churches and go like, oh, this, and then I understood when Dr. King said, Sunday morning is the most segregated hour of the week. But I mean, I remember seeing Catholic nuns one time walking down the street at Heritage USA, and I was like, told my guard, I was like, those are nuns. Like, the Assemblies of God was like, Catholics aren't really Christians. They probably didn't even think Lutherans, and I know they didn't think Baptists because I talked a lot of crap about Baptists. But like, oh, there's nuns. He's like, yeah. He's like, they believe in Jesus. I was like, really? Yeah, and explain it to me. And I remember I had a little crucifix with Jesus on it, and people come up, my Jesus isn't on the cross anymore, But my dad sitting me down and going, well, the Catholics embrace it this way and that, so that was about as much of Christianity I got from my parents, because they were usually exhausted and tired from preaching. I mean, my mom did 5 shows a week. I know my mom did 10 shows a week. My dad did 5 shows a week, and then they did Sunday. So and then my dad was building all this stuff, constantly busy. And, but that was an interesting, like, what I thought Christianity looked like. Now, the opinion of what I thought Christianity was necessarily was different as well. There was a contradiction that laid within that as well. But this contradiction of all these people coming together, when you hear about people like, we need diversity, I was always like really surprised by the diversity that was there. And to be a part of that, even in the school, it was just really kind of it was a cool thing to be a part of, back then. I mean, it was a long time ago. But I would say the Assemblies of God theology got me into this point where hell became a real big deal. Hell was kind of a real scary thing. And then that around the time The Thief in the Night, really like bad B movies about the rapture came out. And so that was, so that was part of my fear, is the rapture and demon possession and things like that. So you had like this weird contradiction of like, the first time I saw tattoos was a security guard that worked at our house who had been in World War II. And he pulled up and he showed me like the hula girl. And then he pulled up a chest and he had a big ship and roses and birds and sparrows. And I was like, why does he have roses and sparrows? That doesn't seem very manly, but it's a tattoo. So it's like, whoa. I was seeing the contradiction. The first time I saw somebody with an earring, there was this guy and he had like a bandana and parachute pants, and he was on the tram, because there was a tram that could drive around to different places. And I was like, oh my gosh, that guy's got an earring. What are we going to do? What's happening? He's got a dangly earring, and, so that was part of, I met Shriners and tattooed people and people from different countries and different ethnicity. And I'm not going to talk. I'm not going to even try to talk, because the ADHD sometimes makes my words, and the dyslexia and all that. Ethnicities. It was just a wild, cool way to grow up. And a kind of horrible way to grow up as well, so there's the contradictions that lie within that. So God, my concept of God versus my what I saw and what I experienced. I mean, one of the biggest impacts on me, and I talk about this a lot, was Tommy Stamps, who was my bodyguard, who every day when he would drop me off, he'd go, where's my hug? Where's my hug? And I wasn't getting, I'm going to be honest. I mean, my mom would hug me and Tommy would hug me. I don't think I got a lot of hugs from my dad. He had his own stuff that he had gone through. So, it wasn't, but he would, where's my hug? And it was like knowing that I was loved by somebody, because I was, I was under a microscope and I was a chubby kid. So life wasn't that friendly. It was a reason I'm an introvert. My best friends were like G.I. Joes and Star Wars figures. But there was those moments, those people that I shared life with, that when I was sick, and would help take care of me or do things like that. If my parents were busy, and the people would come in, and babysitters and things like that really impacted my life, who would take me places and do things with me, and so that was, so what I was seeing was this really beautiful humanity and learning lessons that sometimes are tough and things like that too. Like a lot of my friends, their parents, worked really hard and they were they were poor, and my parents had money, and I felt weird, strange guilt about that type of thing. And you know, there was so much of me that wanted to feel normal. Now, there's a whole point to this, folks, and I think that you will relate to it as we go through this. Probably one of the main reasons these experiences, and also seeing my mom, interview Steve, who was an openly gay man, who was a pastor, who had AIDS, those type of things really just laid a foundation for who I was, and a lot of these people were probably really conservative folks, but I wasn't experiencing that. I wasn't looking for that. We just saw the love and grace. And then some probably were very liberal and open and probably had to be quiet about it. There were people who were part of the LGBT community. I had a feeling looking back that it was kind of a don't ask, don't tell type of thing happening there. Like this was the 80s. It was just a different time. And so what I saw compared to what I would hear about God, I would hear, I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir. And then you'd hear about the rapture and that you wanted to be saved and you didn't want to go to hell. And that, I had that same thing where I'd come home and I didn't find anybody. I thought, oh, I got left behind. That's really weird as a 9-year-old kid to have that kind of thing in your head. And so that was my thing. It was this weird contradiction of, God is kind of this anger God, but I knew Jesus loved me. I knew Jesus protected me. My mom would always pray for me at night. I plead the blood of Jesus over you. There was this really dark, scary room that I had to walk through in order to go upstairs to the kitchen, and I would run through it, and I would always sing, in the name of Jesus, in the name of Jesus. So I thought, Jesus is a protector. Jesus loves me. But, somehow God's come into this thing and is kind of a scary dude, and it's kind of like, I just, it was all I knew. So it's hard to explain. Then there was the scandal. There was the loss. It was just, it seemed like it was overnight. My mom got sick. Jerry Falwell came in. The Jessica Hahn thing came out. Now it was like, I thought people knew who we were before. Now everyone, everyone knew, and their opinions weren't nice. It didn't matter if you were progressive or you're conservative. My parents were seen as the bad guys. And it's really weird nowadays. Like, we live in such a divided culture that when we see people who are doing awful things, that now it's like, if you're this party, you might defend them. And if you're this part, you might, judge them. But back then it was just like everybody kind of had a thing where, the great uniter, oh, someone's having a scandal, we're all going to join together. Saturday night's going to make fun of it, all this stuff, and no one's going to stand up. It wasn't until years later, really until I think World of Wonder came along. Those are the folks who do the drag races and things like that. Fenton and Randy Barbados came along and did that documentary about my mom, where people got to see kind of a more of the reality of what was happening in there, and really got to see the contradiction laid before them and go, oh, my mom became an icon and that type of thing. But the scandal, so I guess what I realized at that time was, once we lost everything, is that outside of that kind of bubble, that really realist, but surreal world growing up in that life, is that all of a sudden that a theology of judgment, that theology of separation and that type of thing, all of a sudden started to now be in my sight. I wasn't in a bubble anymore. So I started to, go to other churches and see other things. And, I remember that in that time, I remember we were in, I think it was like Pineville. And I don't remember if Pineville is in North Carolina or South Carolina. We always lived on the border of North and South. So but I remember there was this little part, this little, like almost like a main street. And it must have been a block long, if anything. And I remember the first time seeing a Klan march, like a march of, my mind was like, what? First time I used the F-bomb in front of my dad. Because I knew I thought that was part of the past, and then this would have been around 87, 88, it's horrible to say that was happening in the South then. But I started to see that kind of that theology of judgment, that theology of fear, that theology of control seemed to become more of a reality in everyday life. And I was at a point where I thought, I just could never get things straight with God. I'd go to all these Christian camps and get saved and then come back and not be, I mean, I couldn't figure any of it out. I thought it was all about salvation and all heaven. So really you're so heavenly minded or hell, afterlife minded, you're no earthly good, was really like, had just been my whole teenage years and everything. Cause it was all about like, what are you going to do? Where are you going to end up? I mean, it was just not about loving the least of these, even though I was shown that by my parents, like even when we lost everything, my parents would, find the poorest family in town, do this, we'd bring them Christmas gifts and food and things like that. And then without TV cameras and stuff like that. So I knew that part of it existed. It seemed to be this really strange contradiction of ideas and thoughts together. Dad went to prison. We went through all that. This isn't really to cover the whole story. I need to just pull back on that a little bit. But I just, I knew Jesus loved me, but I thought God hated me. And I don't know even how my mind worked that out, because I also thought Jesus was God and all this stuff. And, raised to believe the Trinity and all that. But years later, even after I started Revolution in Arizona with my friends, when we started Revolution, even after that, I still had this concept of like, it doesn't seem like good news. I'm trying to help people, but at this point, am I just trying to help people? Like, am I just selling fire insurance, eternal insurance? Like, what am I doing? And now looking back with all my studies on Greek history and Jewish history and Christian history, and even a little history on Islam. And now I look back and go, oh my gosh, no wonder I was a confused kid. Most Christians today are very confused about this stuff and living in a very similar place. But I was living with a family when my dad was in prison. And then when my dad got out of prison, things didn't work out. I ended up moving back to Atlanta and living with this family for a little bit longer. And I had a very interesting moment. And I want to share how I feel like this was. And it's going to be in the book of John. John 20. Some of you are like, thank goodness he's got the Bible out. He's got the Bible out. I do, brothers and sisters. There it is. John 20, 24. And it says, but Thomas, who is called the twin, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, we have seen the Lord. But he said to them, unless I see the marks in the nails in his hands, and put my fingers in the marks of the nails and my hand in his side, I will not believe. Now, of course, I grew up where you weren't even supposed to ask questions, and doubt was frowned upon, especially in the teenage years. It got worse because, I was going to all these different churches and groups and just trying to find a place to fit in. Never did. And so my friend D.E. talked a lot of Donnie Earl Polk. He's a pastor in Atlanta still. He goes by D.E. Polk now. Was telling me about grace, constantly telling me about grace. And I went to him one day and I said, listen, man, I don't see it. And I can't do this anymore. I said, I tried to start this church revolution with people, but I've got all these desires and I screw up all the time. And it's just something, I think I'm broken. I don't understand this faith anymore, and, he looked at me and he goes, Jay, you're trying to earn your salvation. Well, of course, that's what I was taught, that you have to earn it. You have to be a good little boy and you have to watch everything and you have to get constantly resaved and all this stuff. And he goes, no. He's like, literally, and I don't think he's an atonement theory guy anymore, but at the time he was like, you're literally making Christ's death in vain, man. Like you're literally trying to earn your salvation. You can't do that. It is a free gift. And all of a sudden this little grace thing, I think you guys know where I'm going with this. And I was very much Thomas at that point. I said, okay, are you just trying to get away with messing around with your girlfriend and having a few beers every now and then? Are you just trying to do whatever you want? And that's why you're selling me grace. So I was just like a lot of people, what they say about me today, as they do then. And he goes, no, grace is true. I said, well, then you have to prove it to me. So basically, I was like, I got to stick my holes in the hand. I need to know that this is true. And he said, okay, read. I think he had me read like Corinthians and then Galatians and then Ephesians and Paul, the Apostle Paul. Not someone a lot of people, in the progressive world seem to have a hard time with. I want to reclaim Paul, and that's part of my work. But all of a sudden, I was reading things like in Romans. And now there's a whole reason why I'm going here today, and I'm going to tell you that story in a minute. But in Romans 3, so funny. I started out really studying the Bible, reading the New Living, just because it was easier to read. So all my memory, like any verses I memorize, it's usually within the New Living, And now I'm like, I would never read that. I only read, the New Revised Standard Bible. Right? The NRSV is the only book for me. But in Romans 3:23, I got to stay with the mic. Sometimes I realize the audio gets really weird because I don't, I start moving away from the mic. Romans 3:23. We can even start with 21. But now, apart from the law, the righteousness of God has been disclosed and attested to by the law of the prophets, the righteousness of God through the faith in Jesus Christ for all who believe. For there is no distinction, since all have sinned, all fall short of the glory of God. They have now been justified in his grace as a gift, though the redemption of Christ Jesus. Now, in the New Living, it was like, no matter who they are, no matter what they've done, all sin, all fall short of God's glory, but yet God in his gracious kindness declares us not guilty. And I will tell you what, that blew my mind. Growing up in the church with two of the biggest televangelists in the world, hearing preaching all the time, grace was left out. And I feel like grace at that time is like agape is now. And so all of a sudden I was like, what? All fall short, it's grace. It's not about what I do or can't do. I was like, well, maybe this is the way I read Romans all the way through. I had to read all these books all the way through to try to find I found it here, what Paul says. And then he would sit down and we would talk about it. Another one is that hit me at that time. Now, I also grew up believing that the Bible was, perfect. It was a perfect book, that it was, what is the word they use? Come on, somebody throw it at me. That it was infallible and all that stuff, and that it had no contradictions. Now, through lots of studying and schooling and things like that, I've realized that that's just not true. Every jot and tittle was inspired by God. There's always an answer. No contradictions. And that's why people have such a hard time recognizing contradictions, especially within the Christian world. But even outside of that, people have a hard time embracing contradictions. We want to have this black and white thinking where we just exclude, and that's one of the things that really worries me about my progressive brothers and sisters is I feel like even they have that kind of exclusion of, well, they did this or they saw with this person and they go, and they're done, excommunicated. Like canceling is not a Christian thing. Judging people because they hung out with the wrong people. I mean, that's literally what happened to Jesus all the time. And people are like, well, the people he hung out with were bad. I'm like, do you know what? Matthew was a traitor to his own people. He was a tax collector. He was stealing from his own people. He was a cohort, he was working with the government who was, literally an occupier. Like he was working with the occupied army. Like if it was a movie, he would be a bad guy, just think, folks. Grace is pretty radical. So Ephesians, it's 2:8-9. I don't even know why I'm thumbing through this thing. Like I can't find it. There's an MXPX song called "I'm the Bad Guy." They don't play it anymore. I ask them to play it all the time. Inherent, that's the right word. I ask them every time they do a live show. I'm like, I'm the bad guy. And they're like, I'm not playing that anymore, buddy. It's too many verses. I'm going to get them to do it one day. Maybe I'll just go over to their house, to the practice space, and can you just play it in this room? We'll turn off all recording devices. I just want to hear it one more time. I really need new glasses. My eyesight is so bad that I can't see the numbers on these things. I believe there's 8. There we go. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing. It is a gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast. So you can't brag about what you've done. It has nothing to do with what you've done. You're just saved by grace. It's a free gift. There it is. And so this was just, these little verses were just these introductions to like, oh, it is good news. I can even remember calling my father in the middle of the night because he had, he was living in North Carolina at the time. He'd out of prison. And I'd be like, why didn't we talk about it? Why didn't I hear this stuff growing up? He's like, well, some of us just felt it was too good to be true. So think about that. These leaders, these preachers and these stuff have gotten so used to a judgmental gospel, a persecuting gospel, that when the messages of hope and forgiveness and grace, it's only about the cross. It's never in everyday life. It's only about like the moment of salvation. And then it seems like it's done. Are saying, oh, it just seems too good to be true. Like they literally just kind of like, we're going to ignore it. And I think we see that to this very day. And then people who are like, well, Paul says some really horrible stuff and they don't know the difference between genuine Paul and, and even normal, genuine Paul. He can say some things that people go, I'm just going to exclude him. But then they miss out on all these messages about grace and acceptance and love. We don't realize that, oh, this guy was pretty radical for, a Middle Eastern Jewish Pharisee 2,000 years ago. And then there's another one in Romans. And it's Romans 8. Again, my eyeballs. I should have used my highlighter for this, but I did not. Come on, there's 24, so you got to be there. There's 23. And not only the creation, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly while we wait for the adoption of redemption over our bodies. For in hope we were saying, now the hope is seen, it is not a hope. For who hopes for already there? But we have hope for what we do not see. Did I get this? Oh, sorry, guys. See, this is the problem with having bad eyeballs, is you go to the wrong place. I'm at 38 and I was in 28. And here we go. No, in all these things we are more than victors through him who loved us. For I am convinced that neither death nor life, nor angels, no rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor heights, nor depths, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ our Lord. And so reading these things, understanding that there was this little concept of grace, and these were the first verses I ever preached from too. This was like, oh, this is what I'm preaching. It's good news. I got to go back. I got this thing in me, oh my gosh, there's the stuff we haven't been talking about. And I was angry though. So it's weird to be an angry preacher about grace. So I just became enthralled with the biblical text and this idea that there was this good news scattered amongst this Bible, scattered amongst my own faith that had been hidden from me. And it's almost like that pearl, they dug it under, just hid it there, and that felt like that's the whole church did. They're like, oh, here's grace. Let's hide it from everybody. We've got to put plenty of asterisks around it. That's why we say grace is anarchy. That's why now I think agape is anarchy as well. These are the things that we've got to reclaim. The other one was Colossians 1:22. I'll start with 21 because that's the number's bigger there. And you who were once estranged and hostile in mind, doing evil deeds, he is now reconciled in his flesh and body through the death, so that to present you holy and blameless and irreproachable before him. In the New Living, it says, you stand before God holy and blameless. As you stand before God, you are holy and blameless as you stand before him. I even have that verse on me with a tattoo that says blameless sinner. It's so old that you could probably barely read it. because it's like, you've been made holy and blameless as you stand before me. I was like, holy moly, this is good news. Um, Blew my mind. But the problem is that often people who have these types of legalistic systems, they don't want to talk within grace. They don't want to, I had to like go out and find. I literally had to go out and search the world for this. I had to be pushed out of my reality. Father going through prison. I have to jump from home to home, living with all these people in order for me to one day discover grace. Start a church, yet still didn't understand it. And then I had to go back to a place that I had lived to before and find, and I went there because I was just so miserable with myself. And then what I found was good news. It was like I was thirsty, and then there was the water. There it was. Wow, this is probably why your parents originally got into it. This is the concept. This is probably what you saw your whole life, but weren't hearing. You saw it lived out, but you didn't hear it. And people are like, show me your actions, not your words. I have to say, like, sometimes words speak really loudly too, folks. So we need to let's look at both of what things are doing and saying. I think that's important. I think that's why the story of the lost sheep is so interesting, is because the lost sheep had to wander away from the flock to experience grace. There had to be this moment of wandering away and getting lost and going into the thing to realize how unique and special and cared for and loved they were. So that blows my mind. So for me, we end up back at that story of Thomas, where Jesus shows up, just goes, poof, here I am, and goes, oh, now I believe. And that was my Thomas journey. It was that journey of going like, here's the grace. The grace and acceptance and love was like, that's this. Now it all makes sense. I mean, I was probably 20 years old, 20, 21 years old. I was drinking every day, doing all this stuff. I was so tired of all this thing that I'd grown up with, all this trouble I'd gone through. And then I found that. And I got sober because all of a sudden I realized God loved me if I was sober or wasn't sober. All of a sudden this like forbidden fruit, all this like, you can't do this or God doesn't love you. Now I was like, well, God loves me anyway. No matter what I do, God has loved me. All is permissible, but not all is beneficial. And it blew my mind. And you still don't hear people who would think that that's a radical, crazy message today. But this was the beginning of a very long journey for me. Still at that time thinking like, well, I can take the Bible literal because that's good stuff in there. So I would try to study it. And if I'd find contradictions, I'd look at that. Then I had to start studying biblical history and then biblical, okay, now I need to know the context and what was that going on? And why was Paul writing this letter? And why was Jesus saying this to this group? And then why is it in that gospel and not that? Why does James think this? So it was just study. And I would study new things and I'd be so excited about it. And I'd bring up places. I remember one time I went to Cornerstone and I was like, we can't, holiness is what I long for. And then I read this thing like holiness is bestowed upon you as a gift. It's not something you can earn or get. And so I went and I talked about it. I was so excited. I got all my concordances out. I mean, it looked like I was in the library. I remember doing the studies before I went out to Chicago to do this talk. It wasn't even Chicago. It was somewhere in Illinois, Bushnell, Illinois. I was so excited about this talk. I was like, this is going to blow people's minds. Everybody's going to be happy. And what it did was it just pissed everybody off. Like somebody started yelling at me. And then I found out afterwards, the guy yelling at me was the guy who booked all the speakers, who booked me. And he was mad at me. But I just followed it up. I said, okay, well, this is what it means. Even the concordances that I would never use now because they got the slants and things like that. Buying stuff at the Christian bookstores were still chipping away at at bad news, at legalism. You know what I mean? Like it was like you just can't hide it. You can use the apologetics to try to make it happen, but it's just so bluntly faced there that this is good news and that we are loved and we are accepted, that it's hard to do that. And so that's why people don't want to leave their tribes. I experience this so much for people, especially online now, where we're able to talk to people all over the world, where people leave, they come on, they talk to you and say, what you're saying is horrible, because in their tribe it would be bad. And then I'm explaining it to them. And then of course they run away because like, you must be evil, because it's the power of groupthink, the power of tribalism, the power of the flock, if you will, of all the flock together. And when you wander away and you find out that there's another good news or the prodigal son or all those stories, and honestly, through all this work of realizing that the good news was actually good news, and that's why I still believe it. My faith is not based on people, folks. If my faith was based on human beings, especially people who claim to be followers of Christ, I would have no faith at all. I would be like beyond an atheist. I would just be like, we're not even real. We don't even exist. There is nothing, you know. Um, this is a dream of a tick on the back of a lizard, you know, at this point. And so all these years of all this study, I still don't see what Christianity today is in these letters, and these books, and this collection of letters, within these stories, within this context of understanding these things and doing the tough work and doing. I mean, it's really been a struggle. I failed all my classes in school and all this stuff, and then all of a sudden, I was just teaching myself this stuff, and then went and I attended. I could, because I had dropped out. I couldn't even get a college degree or anything when I went into seminary. But I said, can I just be here and be in the classes and study with people and do this work, because I want to know more about this. I got my GED, but no, I'm not going to go to Bible college because I just don't have that time in my life. I'm already doing this work, but can I be here and study alongside you and have these questions and study these things? And they said, yeah, you can do that. Every pass, when I got to know Brian McLaren, when I got to know Brendan, I would just find these guys and sit down with them and be like, I got a list of questions. Let's talk, Tony Jones, who's got a doctorate in theology, Peter Allens, a philosopher, man, I just give me more. I want to know more. The problem is, you study all this amazing, beautiful stuff, and then you don't see it. You still don't see it. You still see people that seem to be coming more from where I was at a point of desperation, and just accepting that and being like, well, it's just too good to be true. All this stuff is heresy, so we got to stay away from it. And what happens is they become very angry. They become bitter. They become very, if you look at the works of the flesh in Galatians, I think you'll see that, they start creating factions and thinking that only their group is right and everybody is wrong. And religion becomes very, it becomes very defensive. It's very defensive and judgmental, and the judgment is coming within the defense, but they don't know how to play the rest of the game. So they're very good at defense, but not living the life of Christ, not going through Christ, not understanding Christ, just defending. And what they're really defending is not even, they're defending their theology, or they're defending their team, or their flock, their tribes, ways of thinking, because that's where the rubber hits the road. I remember in my early 20s and late 30s, I would go speak at some of these places with youth pastors who would really dig me. And I'd speak at their church, and then they'd call me later and be like, yeah, I just got fired. I'm like, what? Yeah, well, I got fired for having you come talk in church. I'm calling past, please don't. I had a dime for everybody I spoke for or pulled for, end up getting fired because of me. I would, have a few dollars. So I don't really see what we call Christianity today in the Bible. Or in the Bible. I don't. And let me share the experience why I decided to go back all the way to the PTL days. Is a few days ago, I was exhausted. We had probably one of my longest work days, and I was beat. So tired. And I was like, I got to do a fundraiser video. We got to get money in this month. Things aren't going great. And the job I work helps me pay my rent, but just a portion of my rent. And, I live next to the school with my kids, and I'm like, I got to, my third job doesn't start till September. And I'm just going, oh, and I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted from all this full day's work out in the sun, sunburnt, tired, been shoveling, dragging, pushing things, you name it. I was doing it. Watering things, mowing things. I had to like 3 different jobs that day than I usually do at my work. And I just opened the phone. I'm like, I'm going to make a video. I made 3. I used 1. And I was exhausted. I couldn't even, and then one of the things, I couldn't even remember a word, and I was like, who cares? You guys can figure it out. I'll put it in the comments, and just like, I'm tired. Please help consider supporting Revolution. Put the video out there. And somebody saw the video and thought, hey, I'll share this with the group called PTL Xers on on Facebook, all these people who kind of celebrate the past and celebrate, they used to work at Heritage USA, or that Heritage USA, Jim and Tammy's ministry and what they built had a profound impact on their life. And they all get together and share pictures and photographs and memories. And I'll share that there. This person thought, I'll share that, then maybe this will help. Maybe they didn't have enough money to give, but they could share, and sharing really does help. So they shared it. And honestly, I don't go there very often because those memories aren't all necessarily positive for me. And I've had some issues with those folks. So I just, I'm going to let them have their memories. I even unfollowed to get, I'm not going to follow it, so I don't see it. I'm just going to let those people, and maybe there's some people there I can connect with, but I'll connect with them in different places. For some reason, I was added on this. And so I saw it, and I started reading the comments of all these people saying, oh, I can't support that. Oh, Jay Baker's gone astray. Oh, he's become liberal. He's liberal. Oh, is he gay? I've heard he's gay. I'm not gay. Just because I wasn't born gay, I like women, but not that there's anything wrong with that. But say all this stuff. Oh, he's bad. He's this. He's that. Oh, his father is so great. Oh, how it's such a shame what happened. When I'm just reading this over and over and over again. If all these people telling me why they, and I'm going like, at what point do you just not say anything? Like you just go like, oh, you don't have to donate. You don't really have to say anything bad. You can go, oh, it's interesting. He's working another job. Oh, it's not really my taste, but really going for it. And so I wrote a response, and most people were really great in the response, but there were still a few people who were like, I'm still going for it. Like they just defense. You're bad. You're wrong. We're right. This is our culture. This is this. You don't belong here. You're bad. I'm going like, man, you guys, this PTL already has like one of my biggest traumas in my life was being an 11-year-old kid, watching everybody I knew I couldn't play with anymore. The school I attended belonged to Heritage, so I didn't go to that school. I grew up and raised in that school, couldn't be there anymore. Everything was gone. It was a huge loss for me as a child, and then to have all this people just being like, you're not good enough, oh, you're bad, and just giving all these reasons why. So I put out my defense, and some people didn't like it and some people did, but that's what inspired me today, is because that legalism, I think we see it within politics today, people who, support the 10 commandments being in the school, but don't support kids having free lunches at school, which I would just like to say that Seattle has decided that every kid in school will get free lunches, and those who need help will get not just free lunches, they will get free breakfasts, and they will get food brought to them on the weekends. And this is one of those socialist liberals that people seem to so be afraid of. So I'm seeing a lot of Jesus there. So you can argue what you want to argue, but that's happening here. To me, that's a win. This idea that Christians are like, well, we can't, that they really worry about who's going to give someone a sandwich, and that the tax dollars go to that. And but don't seem to care much of it going to war or things like that. But when it comes to feeding children, I don't understand. To me, that shows you how polluted and toxic the gospel's become, and that it is completely another good news, and then, I've spent my life taking the Bible and the biblical text so seriously, and then try to have these conversations with these people. Oh, no, you don't. You're making, I'm going like, you literally go to church on Sunday. Maybe you have a Bible thing on it. I've spent my whole life. I mean, I went to seminary just to learn, I didn't get any credits. I didn't get anything. I just wanted to learn, I read this all. I don't even read fiction anymore. I started a little bit because my son needs help reading. So we read some fiction together. We just read Holes together, and that was really fun. My daughter wants to read The Diary of Anne Frank. And so we're kind of trying to figure out how we're going to do that together. And I think it'll be good. It's just, she's 9 years old, but I think it's probably worth a read. And it has gotten worse. I always kind of sometimes imagine that maybe my story was a little bit different than everybody else's. And I see it. I mean, I deal with Christians who defend another gospel and another good news at such a point, and they become so angry. And I see no fruits. I see no peace or patience or kindness or joy. I don't see anything like trying to even argue well. It's just straight straight, you don't belong here, you're wrong, and it's not the gospel. And that's why revolution exists, is to be like, we have got to reclaim this. We've got to return to the truth of the gospel. We've got to return to agape. And it's funny even here, because I invited a bunch of people to come listen today, and I watched them. As soon as I started to mention that story, the numbers went. um, but the things we see most of today, at least in a lot of, is not the gospel I recognize, again, from the Bibles that I spent my life studying. But I do see it from when I've moved. I do recognize it, though, from when I was moving through so many tribes of judgment, so many tribes of people who are like, well, the great people, a lot of them are really great people, but they're misinformed. So they're like, well, we love you, but you've decided to believe this. So we have to exile. You have to be exiled. Even when the guy who was sleeping with his mother-in-law was exiled in 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, Paul says, bring that guy back. I was just going to see how you guys reacted, and you overreacted. You need to bring that guy back. You need to practice restoration. And it's strange who they choose. Like, grace has become this kind of, oh, well, we'll give grace for Donald Trump and some of these guys, but we're not going to give grace to these people over here. We're not going to give grace and maybe a second thought. Maybe this guy did find something new in the Bible. Like, we don't even want, to me, that's Christianity. This is, like I said in my last talk, like, Christianity will always exist. It just won't be Christianity as the message of Christ and agape and grace and forgiveness. And I want to leave you with this. I've gone a little long today, and got to go pick up my kiddos. The factions or the flocks have decided to find no common ground, to the point of one thing. Like, one of the things that people kept bringing up, and it's funny because I made my announcement that I was supportive of my LGBTQ brothers and sisters, or being gay affirming, or whatever you want to call it, inclusive, all that, in 2005. And one of the main things that those people kept saying to me, oh, the gays and this and that. And I'm like, how sad is it that we're still here, and that they can't just be like, okay, well, we don't agree with you, but no, you're done. You're out. There's not even a conversation. So the group dynamic, group think, it's and the willingness to go, it will go a long way, and it will create something that does not represent the faith anymore. And that's become a tradition. And it's become so traditional in this country, especially amongst, evangelicals and charismatics and folks like that. And Calvinists as well. I would say they kind of mixed the two, mainline and the mainline with the fundamentalists together. We're missing it. And I don't like to be here and be like, oh, I'm the right guy. I've got it right. I don't have everything right. There's stuff, you know what? I listen to biblical scholarship constantly. I read biblical, and there are times where I'm like, oh my God, I just read this the way they said don't read it. Okay, so I got to rethink this, And then there's times where I read their stuff and I'm like, you know what? I don't necessarily agree with this because of this, and this, and because I've gotten to know scholarship and history again myself. And I like philosophy and psychology too. So you're able to see things differently there. But it's not a law book or an answer book. I mean, when Paul wrote books, they were very particular to a very particular reason and a group of people. They were very particular ones. It wasn't like, here's my thoughts on, gay marriage, or here's my thoughts on, the resurrection. And if you see how Paul came to his thoughts on resurrection, that's very interesting as well. But that's not what today's talk is. I just don't see a lot of good news these days. And like I said, defensiveness, or being defensive, or defense, seems to have taken the place of love, and really taken the place of agape. And agape has called us to love people even when we don't feel like it, or we don't think they're a member of our tribe. To the point when I did a talk a few months ago about agape, I had somebody say, man, I haven't heard a church preach about that in like 20 years. Like, the defensiveness and the judgmentalism, the in and outs have taken the place of agape. And then I wrote this down after that, thinking about this. And I want you to think about it. You don't have to agree with me, but I just want you to think to me and see if this rings true with you. That not only has the defensiveness taken the place of agape, but also of grace. How little we hear of grace nowadays. And I mean, I saw a progressive thing the other day, and the guy was like talking about like why grace causes people to not want Christianity because of forgiveness. Now, I believe grace and justice have to go hand in hand like anyone else. But I'm even seeing more things critiquing grace on the left when we haven't even learned to really embrace it as well enough on the left, to be honest with you. Or we do a very selective way of like, oh, well, we'll embrace our LGBTQ brothers and sisters in the main line, but we won't embrace anybody who doesn't agree with us. And we just kind of become a mirror image. And that really, really worries me, because it's just, we end up making these same mistakes. Just like, I'm dyslexic, so I understand that, just negatively, just opposite, just backwards. And honestly, I'd rather see him backwards, but at the same time, I'd rather see us all really learn to embrace grace and agape. But we don't. And this was the one that really gets me. This one really blows me away, because it's also selective. Like if you want to see like really conservative, legalistic Christians give grace, or conservative Christians give grace, they'll do it to like, for some reason, they'll be like, all of a sudden comparing Donald Trump to David, so there's a selective grace, but there's not this kind of like universal love of this free gift of forgiveness and love and acceptance out there. That's why I say it's anarchy. It can't be selective. But this is the big one: forgiveness. There was that famous comedian, and I can't remember his name right now. He smoked and everything. He passed away. Really, really great comedian. For some reason, his name escapes me. But he would be like, we're Christians and we don't like what you said. He said people would come up to him afterwards and say, we're Christians and we don't like what you said. And then he would look at him and go, well, then forgive me. And the fact that forgiveness is not even thought of, is not even seen as much as the defensiveness. And you probably hear more about their political party and their political beliefs than the idea of forgiveness or grace or agape. And I would say probably in this is probably the line of that is agape is probably one of the most forgotten things, which is really sad, because that's what God is. The whole point of God is agape. That's probably the biggest left out by both groups of people, all of us. Then probably followed by forgiveness, because we do hear some forgiveness, but it's only for salvation. But you know what? Forgiveness is not just for salvation anymore. And then grace. Grace. Agape, forgotten, grace, forgiveness, and then grace. These are all just concepts that we have to reclaim. We have to realize that these are the center. If our commandment is to love God with all your heart and equally as important your neighbor as yourself, if the Apostle Paul says the only thing that counts is faith expressing itself through love, and this is all agape, yet we don't talk about it anymore. We just say the word love, and people get that confused with romantic love and feeling love and a desire of wanting to be with someone. So it's getting confused, and you're going, well, I don't like this person. It's Bill Hicks. That's who said that. It was Bill Hicks. Thank you so much. I can't believe I forgot Bill Hicks' name. It was Bill Hicks. Yes. And this concept, if we've left all these things out, the very foundations of the faith, it's another gospel. And the crazy thing is like, well, this isn't a new thing. Why do we go through Galatians every year? One of the earliest, Paul's earliest writings, one of the earliest Christian writings, is all about two people coming together, two groups of Christians who can't seem to forgive each other and live together and work. It happens right off the bat. Yet here we are now. And the things that are kind of required of both groups to stop biting and devouring one another are agape, grace, forgiveness, restoration. And I wish we could see the bigger picture, because sometimes I think people like on the progressive side, well, I don't like restoration is like, Mark Driscoll's about preaching again, we see it like, okay, well, there's probably like a few thousand of those big preachers out there. Out of those, there's probably been a couple hundred who've gotten some sort of weird restoration and they're back doing the same old thing. But maybe it wasn't really restoration. Maybe they just, like my dad, just dug himself out of the pit. Nobody came along. Like he just came until finally they came along, but he kept just being like, I'm going to do this no matter what, like meeting in bowling alleys and old movie theaters and roller skating rinks. He was just like, I'm going to do this. And eventually you're going to have to accept me. And it wasn't like people came down like, oh, let's get this train rolling. That's not how it worked. And to say like, well, this is why these are dangerous words. It's like, Let's not pick the 10 things where maybe something went wrong, or you in your own eyesight or your own thought it went wrong, because we don't know what happened there, and get rid of the foundational message of this faith. We've lost it. So I'm going to leave you with this. Have you guys ever heard of the 2000 the Baltimore Ravens? Have you heard of the Ravens? I don't know anything about sports, but I wanted to find out if there was a team that was really, really good at defense. Like their team was the best at defense, but they were horrible at winning football games. And so I found the football team called the Baltimore Ravens from the year 2000. And they had this amazing defense. But at scoring or winning games, they really struggled. Offense, it was just a bad thing, to the point that the quarterback, some would call maybe the pastor, said the defense had to score shutouts for us to win. Like it got so bad that we had to just, in order to win, the defense had to do the wins. And to me, I feel like that's where we're at, is for these folks to even get wins and stuff. It's still all about defense. It's still all about defending something that's not practiced, defending a truth to be cruel, defending a counterfeit gospel, another gospel that's not the gospel at all. It's defensive. And then to start to see my evangelical brothers and sisters, my progressive brothers and sisters, to be practicing so much defense as well. And what I hope is that we will find nonviolence, not just physical nonviolence, but vocal nonviolence, and nonviolence of the mind, and that we'll grasp agape. And that agape is that practice of nonviolence. It is a practice. It takes time. It's progress, not perfection. We have to learn it. We have to repeat it. It has to become muscle memory. And that we would learn this within the church and see something change. I'd say right now I'm seeing more with like these socialist leaders right now, making sure people get fed and get basic needs. That to me, that's where we should be as Christians. We shouldn't be the ones going, I don't want, they shouldn't be doing it. We should be doing it. Well, then do it. Don't call them sons of hell because you don't like the way where they were born or the faith they were raised in, because they're doing what you should be doing at a greater scale. Join in. That should be our common ground. Our common grounds should be agape, forgiveness, and grace, and restoration. Thank you so much for listening to Revolution today. That's where we're at. That's what I learned from people from my past saying what a disappointment I was. And you know what? Some people came in and redeemed it too. So, redemption is there. And some people gave some grace and forgiveness. And I had to ask a few people to be reminded. I had to remind a few folks of those concepts as well. So thanks for that. Hey, listen, again, Revolution Church really could use your support. You can go to revolutionchurch.com. You can make a donation there. You can share this stuff with your friends and neighbors. If you like this, it helps us get into the algorithm and helps people who need and leave those mean comments to hear this and see this and to find this kind of stuff. Oh, thank you. Someone just said they enjoyed the talk and they're looking for there is so much more good work ahead if we can get a freaking budget and make this thing work. We're nonprofit. The other jobs are knocking me out. That's why I made that. It's like, please help Revolution so I don't have to shovel all day. I like the shoveling. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to stop unless something really great happens and we're able to do marches and help lead other people and help other churches and go meet with people. But, I enjoy the job. The consistency of not just reading the book is nice. So yeah, let's defend. Yeah, that's a great way to say it. Defending what is not practiced. Yeah. So thank you, everybody. We can use your support. I'd be grateful for that. I was kind of hoping that maybe August would be our best month ever, just because I wanted to go back and be like, hey, look what happened. We turned that around. But anyhow, that's me just wanting to sleep at night. Love you guys so much. I love doing this work. I am so excited about taking these extra classes. Thank you for your donations that made that possible. Thank you for making Revolution possible. Thank you for making this hour possible. I'm a half an hour. I was late at work last week because of you guys, and now I'm late picking up my kids. Look at you. It's not your fault. It's my fault, but it's more fun to pretend to blame you and be like, you guys. But I love you and I appreciate you and I love spending time with you and I love exploring these thoughts and ideas with you. And I'm hoping that I am helping give you the tools you need where you're at in your life right now and with your communication with others. See you next week. Bye-bye.